In this video, we examine one of the most unusual disciplinary systems recorded in Siberian frontier history. We explore the rise of Tsar Mikhail, the administrative structure he built, and the methods he approved for maintaining order in remote territories. We then analyze the Watchtower of Wolves system, how it operated, why it was created, and how environmental conditions shaped its use. Finally, we look at the later years of the policy, its adjustments, and how it gradually shifted as the northern provinces expanded and changed. Zar McCale of the northern frontier was born in a remote settlement near the Yenisei River, where political attention rarely reached. His early life was shaped by exposure to harsh winters, scarce resources, and a culture of disciplined survival. These conditions formed the foundation of his later administrative philosophy. His father served as a regional officer controlling trade routes between Siberia and the central provinces. Mikhail observed the systems of taxation, seasonal commerce, and supply movement that sustained northern outposts. This environment familiarized him with the logistics of governing sparsely populated but strategically important territories. During adolescence, Mikhail received formal instruction in record-keeping, border management, and the circulation of military reports. He developed a preference for precise documentation and hierarchical command. These skills distinguished him from other noble youths with less structured training. By the age of 17, he was placed in charge of a small frontier station to test his capacity for command. He supervised a unit responsible for monitoring wildlife migration patterns and protecting trade caravans. His success was attributed to efficient work delegation and consistent communication with nearby garrisons. When rebellions increased in the borderlands of Siberia, Mikhail's unit maintained stability without exceeding its resources. This performance gained the attention of senior military administrators in the capital. His reports were noted for clarity, practical solutions, and cost-saving measures. As disturbances expanded, he was summoned to the Central Court and assigned to the Northern Strategic Council. This council managed remote territories that required extensive oversight due to climate, distance, and limited infrastructure. Mikhail contributed by proposing standardized guidelines for winter patrols and supply storage. His rise accelerated when the reigning Tsar sought officials capable of reducing frontier losses during severe winters. Mikhail's recommendations were adopted in multiple regions and produced measurable improvements in soldier survival rates. His analytical approach made him a favored advisor, following a series of political transitions in the capital. He was nominated for succession based on administrative merit rather than noble popularity. His appointment was supported by military officers who valued his practical policies and logistical discipline. This endorsement strengthened his legitimacy during coronation. Upon assuming the throne, Tsar Mikhail prioritized structural reforms in Siberian provinces. He reorganized districts to balance population distribution and improve resource allocation. He viewed the northern territories as central to long-term expansion of trade and military influence. One of his early initiatives was the establishment of winter observation posts across major wolf migration corridors. These posts were intended to study environmental patterns, secure transport routes, and maintain awareness of natural threats that affected frontier communities. Data collected from these stations informed multiple administrative decisions. Under his reign, road development became a primary focus. He ordered the construction of reinforced winter roads using compacted snow layering and timber sidewalls. This improved travel stability for military sled units and traders. The enhanced routes reduced isolation between outposts. Tsar Mikhail also implemented standardized census procedures across the northern regions. Local officials were trained to perform population counts, livestock assessments, and documentation of household resources. The new census improved tax regulation and planning for winter supply requirements. Trade reform was another element of his governance. He introduced fixed tariffs for merchants transporting goods through the Siberian corridor. These tariffs aimed to eliminate inconsistencies in taxation and prevent exploitation by local intermediaries. Revenues increased steadily under the new system. The Tsar maintained reserved relations with the nobility, but valued competence over lineage. His court appointments favored officers and administrators with demonstrated experience in northern conditions. This policy shifted political influence toward those familiar with frontier management. McCale invested in mapping operations to improve geographic knowledge of remote districts. Survey teams were supplied with updated instruments for measuring terrain, forest density, and river systems. Their findings contributed to more accurate planning for settlement expansion and military facilities. He also paid close attention to wildlife behavior due to its influence on regional stability. Wolf populations, in particular, were monitored through seasonal field reports. Knowledge of pack movement helped protect livestock communities and supply caravans that relied on predictable travel routes. During his reign, he emphasized punctual reporting from all provincial offices. Delayed communication was treated as administrative negligence. This strict adherence to efficient record flow strengthened central oversight and reduced unreported incidents. Military organization underwent modifications under his rule. Troops stationed in Siberia received specialized training for cold weather endurance, shelter construction, and extended patrol methods. These adjustments lowered casualty rates during severe winters and improved operational reliability. To maintain authority, the Tsar developed clear legal categories for frontier crimes, including sabotage, smuggling, and failure to follow winter patrol regulations. He believed structured legal frameworks were necessary to reduce ambiguity in remote settings where enforcement was difficult. His interest in environmental policy extended to forest management. He mandated selective logging practices to preserve timber needed for winter fortification projects. Designated reserves were created to prevent timber shortages that previously affected settlement stability. The Tsar fostered limited educational programs for frontier children, focusing on numeracy, basic record-keeping, and environmental awareness. He believed these skills would produce future administrators who understood the climate and geography of their homeland. These programs remained localized but consistent. Diplomatic relations with nearby nomadic groups were maintained through regulated trade agreements. McCale permitted controlled exchanges of fur, livestock, and grain to prevent disputes over hunting territories. These agreements reduced border conflicts during the earlier years of his reign. His governance style remained consistent throughout his tenure. He valued precision, routine, and clear documentation. Officials under his rule were evaluated based on their adherence to standardized procedures rather than personal influence within the court. As his reign progressed, McCale focused increasingly on internal monitoring of rebellions and unrest. Although major uprisings were infrequent, he believed that prevention depended on understanding environmental pressures that drove frontier dissatisfaction. He relied on annual reports summarizing food shortages, migration patterns, and local complaints. The Tsar introduced disciplinary systems for provincial officers who failed to maintain winter preparedness. Consequences included demotion, reassignment, or temporary loss of official privileges. This system reinforced expectations across the administrative structure. By the later years of his rule, Mikhail developed policies emphasizing long-term frontier security. He encouraged settlement programs that granted land to families willing to cultivate remote areas. These settlements functioned as buffers against unregulated wilderness zones. Throughout his reign, he communicated the importance of environmental observation as a central principle of governance. He believed that understanding the natural cycles of the northern regions was essential for maintaining stability. This belief shaped many of his administrative decisions and strategic priorities. His rule established a framework that integrated climate awareness, structured documentation, and consistent oversight. These policies remained defining characteristics of his administration and continued to influence frontier governance long after their implementation. His emphasis on order and regulation shaped the identity of the northern territories during his time in power. The Watchtower of Wolves system originated during the middle period of Tsar Mikhail's reign. It was introduced as a frontier corrective measure meant to discourage rebellion, smuggling, and desertion in the northern districts. The system was designed to utilize existing environmental conditions without requiring extensive construction resources. The watchtowers were not tall structures, but reinforced wooden posts placed at regular intervals in wolf-active territories. Each post served as a designated station where offenders could be restrained overnight. The locations were selected based on patrol reports documenting consistent wolf movement. Administrative records show that the system was categorized as a remote disciplinary response. It required minimal manpower compared to full imprisonment or long-term resource allocation. Local officers were instructed to apply it only for frontier violations considered disruptive but not severe enough for execution. The procedure began with a formal charge issued by a district officer. Charges typically included obstruction of patrol operations, sabotage of winter storage, or repeated violation of travel regulations. Documentation was submitted to the provincial archive before the offender was transported. Offenders were taken to the nearest watchtower station by sled or foot escort. The escorting unit recorded the time of arrival, temperature readings, and snow depth. These environmental measurements were included in administrative files to maintain consistency in record keeping. Each tower station had a wooden post equipped with iron restraints. The restraints were checked daily to prevent rust or mechanical failure. Officers were instructed to follow strict fastening procedures to avoid accidental injury unrelated to the intended disciplinary conditions. The individual was secured to the post in a standing or slightly reclined position, depending on the station design. The binding method limited movement without restricting breathing. Clothing removal was prohibited due to temperature regulations, but officers could reduce insulation layers if deemed necessary for compliance. A perimeter inspection was performed before the officer left the site. This inspection verified the presence of wolf tracks, snow distribution patterns, and visibility levels. These factors were entered into the night logbook to verify that conditions aligned with standard protocol. The system relied heavily on natural winter temperatures. Frost exposure was considered a central component because it reflected the environmental discipline valued by the northern administration. Officers monitored regional temperature forecasts to ensure the process remained within approved boundaries. Night patrol units were assigned to travel between watchtower stations at fixed intervals. Their purpose was not to intervene, but to document conditions and note any disturbances. Patrol reports included audio observations, track changes, and overall visibility. The presence of wolves was monitored through field data, rather than direct interaction. Officers recorded pack size estimates based on track dispersion and distance patterns. These reports informed later administrative evaluations of the system's effectiveness in deterrence. The Watchtower system followed a strict time window from dusk until dawn. Deviations required written explanations submitted to the provincial military office. The fixed timing helped standardize disciplinary outcomes and reduced ambiguity in official records. When dawn arrived, the officer responsible for the station returned with an assistant. They checked the condition of the offender, evaluated signs of frostbite, and documented physical indicators. Medical intervention was only authorized when the individual required stabilization for further administrative proceedings. Survival was not treated as an indicator of innocence or guilt. Instead, it was viewed as evidence of compliance with the disciplinary process. Offenders who survived typically faced additional administrative review to determine if their charges required further penalties or if the initial correction was sufficient. If the individual did not survive the night, the officer filed an outcome report detailing environmental data, observed wildlife activity, and restraint integrity. This report was transferred to the regional archive for long-term record keeping. The system prioritized consistent documentation rather than subjective judgment. The government justified the system as a method suited to the northern climate. It required fewer personnel, reduced long-term imprisonment costs, and relied on familiarity with environmental patterns already monitored by frontier units. These practical considerations aligned with Tsar Mikhail's preference for procedural efficiency. The placement of watchtower stations changed periodically based on updated wolf migration maps. Seasonal shifts required adjustments to maintain the intended environmental exposure. Officers relocated stations, using standardized measurement criteria to ensure reproducibility across provinces. Wolves were not directly controlled by officials. Their presence served as an environmental factor rather than an engineered threat. Administrative manuals emphasized observation rather than encouragement or coercion of wildlife activity. The provincial archive maintained annual summaries analyzing the effectiveness of the system. Evaluations included survival rates, frequency of repeat offenses, and the operational cost of maintaining the stations. Data was used to adjust policy and establish future guidelines. The system operated primarily in sparsely populated regions where conventional imprisonment facilities were limited. Local officers relied on sled teams, observation posts, and migratory knowledge to manage logistics. These factors contributed to the system's integration into frontier governance. Public knowledge of the watchtowers varied by region. In some districts, the system functioned as a known deterrent that reduced petty offenses. In remote settlements, information circulated through administrative announcements rather than community rumor. Officers assigned to the watchtower system received specialized training connected to environmental observation. Training included familiarization with wolf behavior, winter safety measures, and reporting procedures. Competence in these areas was essential for consistent application. Transport to the towers required strict adherence to safety protocols due to risk of blizzards or unstable ice. Units were instructed to maintain supply kits containing heat sources, binding tools, and emergency rations. These kits ensured that transport remained standardized across districts. The system included weather exemption policies. If temperatures fell below predetermined safety thresholds, or if storms interfered with visibility, scheduled disciplinary nights could be postponed. Officers documented the reason and submitted revised dates to the provincial office. In some cases, multiple offenders were brought to a station simultaneously. Each individual was secured to a separate post within the same zone. Officers monitored spacing to avoid conflict between restrained individuals while preserving environmental exposure. The watchtower zones were inspected after each winter season. Inspections assessed structural stability, restraint condition, and changes in wildlife presence. Findings guided decisions on whether stations required relocation or reinforcement. Frontier officers emphasized neutrality when applying the system. Personal disputes or informal grievances were prohibited from influencing disciplinary decisions. Administrative manuals stressed that all actions must be supported by written charges and recorded procedures. The system generated stable data sets due to its consistent format. Annual reports displayed clear patterns in temperature effects, wildlife behavior, and compliance rates. These patterns contributed to broader studies on frontier discipline and environmental management. Tsar Mikhail reviewed provincial reports during winter councils held in the capital. He regarded the watchtower system as a balanced method for addressing mid-level offenses. His approval reinforced its continued operation across multiple northern districts. Communication between towers and district headquarters followed scheduled intervals. Runners or sled teams delivered logbooks every few days. The delivery process ensured archival accuracy and enabled regular oversight by higher officials. Despite its demanding conditions, the system required fewer resources than constructing new prisons or expanding existing facilities. This efficiency aligned with the Tsar's preference for practical solutions suited to the northern climate. Resource allocation remained a central priority throughout his reign. Over time, the Watchtower of Wolves system became integrated into the standard disciplinary framework of the northern provinces. Its procedures, documentation, and environmental focus reflected the administrative culture Zar McCale promoted. The system continued to operate in accordance with his governance principles without significant revision. In the later period of Tsar Mikhail's rule, the provincial councils conducted broader evaluations of the Watchtower of Wolves system. These reviews assessed its overall efficiency, logistical demands, and compliance with established regulations. The evaluations aimed to ensure consistency as districts expanded and population centers shifted. Reports indicated that the watchtower stations continued functioning as intended, but growth in new settlements required updated placement strategies. More communities were forming near former wilderness zones, prompting the administration to relocate several stations farther north. These relocations maintained the system's reliance on natural conditions. With increased settlement, wolf migration patterns changed noticeably. Officers submitted new maps detailing altered routes and reduced pack density in some areas. These changes required adjustments to tower spacing and observation schedules to maintain standardized environmental exposure. As communication networks improved, district officers began integrating telegraph posts into frontier routes. Although the watchtowers themselves remained unchanged, faster communication allowed for quicker documentation transfers. This led to more accurate record-keeping and earlier detection of procedural inconsistencies. During annual reviews, the capital issued revised guidelines emphasizing uniform restraint methods and stricter environmental monitoring. These guidelines addressed minor deviations that had appeared over time due to officer turnover and shifting regional climates. The revisions aimed to preserve consistency across provinces. Medical teams assigned to northern districts provided updated assessments on frost management and survival outcomes. Their data contributed to refined temperature thresholds for conducting disciplinary nights. These thresholds ensured that the system continued aligning with administrative safety policies. As infrastructure expanded, the need for resource-efficient punishments decreased. New holding facilities were constructed in several districts, offering alternative methods for addressing frontier violations. This development gradually reduced reliance on remote environmental discipline. Administrative officers noted that the system had fulfilled its initial purpose during the earlier stages of settlement. It had provided a functional means of maintaining order when resources were limited, and distances between communities were extensive. Its relevance diminished as stability increased. The provincial archives documented the gradual decline in tower usage as newer corrective measures became available. The watchtowers were not dismantled immediately, but were maintained at minimal operational capacity. In case remote districts required them, their presence became more symbolic than functional. By the last years of Tsar Mikhail's reign, the Watchtower of Wolves system transitioned into a secondary disciplinary option. It remained part of the official framework, but was rarely applied due to improved infrastructure, updated legal processes, and expanded administrative oversight. The system's influence persisted primarily in archival records and regional policy documentation.